New York, 1975. The blaring car horns and glaring lights of Manhattan did nothing to lessen Michael Peterson's loneliness. Each step on the icy sidewalk not only made his old wounds ache, but also tore open haunting memories of Vietnam. Two bullets from years ago had stolen not just his ability to walk normally, but also his faith in life. Darkness was falling over the city, bringing with it the bone-chilling cold of a New York winter. Michael clutched his tattered army jacket tightly, the only relic left from his days as a soldier. 3 days without food, 2 nights sleeping in the park, and not a cent to his name. This was far from the life he had imagined after returning from the battlefield. Present day, 2024. Urgent announcement from the crew. Inclement weather may affect this flight. The announcement echoed through the noisy atmosphere of Ronald Reagan Washington Airport. Flight information screens flickered with the red word delayed. Barron Trump frowned as he glanced at his phone. This was the third message from the person waiting for him in Newark. Flight 247 will still depart as scheduled, but we urge all passengers to board quickly to avoid disruptions caused by the weather. Back to 1975, 1 week before the fateful encounter. The icy rain of New York poured relentlessly into the night. Michael Peterson stood on the Brooklyn Bridge, rain mingling with tears on his gaunt face. Below, the dark waters of the East River churned like a sinister invitation. 3 months had passed since his return from Vietnam, and everything had only gotten worse. "Just jump," a voice in his head whispered. "End it all." Michael slowly climbed over the railing, his leg throbbing from his old wound. Suddenly, the cry of a baby echoed in the distance, jolting him back. That cry! It sounded just like the child from the village he had saved in his last battle before being wounded. What had become of that child? Did they grow up in peace? He stepped back, leaning against the railing. Not today, maybe tomorrow, but not today. 1 week later, Michael stopped in front of a small diner, the warmth from inside beckoning him irresistibly. Through the foggy glass, he saw happy families gathered around dinner tables. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness struck. His body weakened from days of hunger and exhaustion. He staggered, leaning against the wall. "Hey, buddy!" a voice called out as a hand gripped his shoulder. "Are you okay?" Michael looked up to see a middle-aged man in a fine suit, gazing at him with concern. But before he could respond, his legs gave out. The world spun, and everything faded to black. Present-day Barron had just settled into his first-class seat when a loud commotion from the back startled him. An elderly man in military uniform had collapsed in the narrow aisle of the economy cabin. Murmurs of panic rippled through the plane. "Is there a doctor on board?" The flight attendant's urgent voice rang out. 1975. When Michael woke up, he found himself in the warm confines of the diner. In front of him was a steaming bowl of soup, and the stranger from before was still seated, patiently waiting for him. "Fred Trump," the man introduced himself, pushing the bowl toward Michael. "And no, this isn't charity. I recognize the badge on your jacket. 25th Infantry Division, right? My brother served in that unit." Michael nodded, surprised by the man's familiarity. In Fred Trump's eyes, he didn't see the pity or disdain he'd grown accustomed to since returning home. Instead, there was respect and understanding. Michael wanted to decline, but hunger won out. As the warm soup soothed his throat, he began to share his story. The nights spent in field hospitals, the ceaseless echoes of bombs in his mind, and the aimlessness he felt returning to a country that seemed to have forgotten soldiers like him. Fred listened intently, his expression contemplative. When Michael recounted the night he stood on the Brooklyn Bridge, Fred's hands clenched tightly on the table. "I nearly lost my brother to PTSD, Fred said softly. "He was lucky to have family by his side. But soldiers like you deserve better than this." Fred pulled a business card from his pocket and placed it on the table. "Tomorrow, 8 a.m., go to this address. Not charity, not a handout. A real job with a fair wage." Michael picked up the card, his hand trembling slightly. Fred met his eyes and said, "I can't change your past, but I can help you build a future." Present day. "Sorry," the elderly veteran tried to stand, his face pale. "PTSD, it's still Sometimes, tight spaces always made him feel suffocated. They reminded him of nights spent in bunkers, of overcrowded containers filled with injured soldiers. The droning of the airplane engine only made things worse. "Deep breaths, sir." A flight attendant knelt beside him. "You're safe here." But the panic refused to release its grip. Cold sweat formed on his brow, and the world around him began to spin. "I've seen my father like this," Barron spoke up, his voice calm and steady. He said, "Open spaces and light help." Barron had already risen from his seat. Without hesitation, he walked toward the veteran. "Sir," Barron said, his voice firm yet gentle, "please take my seat." The cabin fell silent. A few passengers raised their phones, likely recognizing the president's son. But Barron didn't care. In his piercing blue eyes was only genuine concern for the veteran before him. 1975, first day on the job. Michael stood in front of the construction site, his heart pounding. This was his first opportunity since returning, and the fear of failure made him want to run away. "Peterson," Fred Trump's voice called out. "Come here, let me introduce you to the foreman." The foreman, a burly man with a stern face, looked Michael up and down, his gaze lingering on his injured leg. "I don't need a cripple," he said bluntly. "This site isn't a place for—" "John," Fred interrupted, his tone firm. "He's a veteran, and I trust him. Your responsibility, Fred, but don't blame me if something goes wrong." Present day, on the plane. The plane began its ascent, engines roaring. Michael, now seated in first class, gripped the armrest tightly. The sound of the engines, it reminded him of the helicopter rotors. 1975. The first week was hell. His leg throbbed with excruciating pain. The other workers eyed him as a burden, but Michael gritted his teeth and pushed through. Each night, he remembered the night he stood on the Brooklyn Bridge. Then one day, the scaffolding collapsed. John, the foreman, was trapped beneath the wreckage. No one dared to go in, fearing further collapse. But Michael, he was all too familiar with navigating dangerous terrain during the war. "Don't move," he told John as he maneuvered through the steel beams. "I'm getting you out." Present day. "Apologies," the captain's voice echoed through the cabin. "We're about to experience some turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts." The plane shook violently. Several passengers screamed. Michael closed his eyes and took deep breaths. 1975. "You saved my life," John said from his hospital bed. "I'm sorry I misjudged you." Michael shook his head. "We're a team. That's what we learned in the Army." Present day, on the plane. As Michael finished telling his story to the young boy, the passengers nearby had grown silent, listening intently. A middle-aged woman seated behind him wiped away tears. "My father was a veteran too," she said, her voice trembling. "He never talked about those days. Now I understand why." "War changes people," Michael nodded. "But sometimes it's in the darkest moments that we find the light in humanity." A businessman in a suit nearby closed his laptop. "I run a foundation supporting veterans," he said. "We help them find jobs, just like Fred Trump did for you. Perhaps you could share your story with others." Torreyedor, 1975, 6 months after the first day. "Peterson," Fred called Michael into his office. "Have a seat." On the desk lay a thick folder. "John recommended you for a promotion, project manager for the new site in Queens." Michael shook his head. "I don't think I deserve this." "Let me tell you about the first carpenter my father ever hired," Fred said with a smile. "He was a World War I veteran." Present day. "I know you," an elderly man seated next to Barron spoke up. "You're Donald Trump's son." Barron nodded slightly, bracing himself for the inevitable judgments. "In 1987, the old man continued, I worked at one of your family's casinos in Atlantic City. One day your grandfather, Fred Trump, visited. He spent an entire hour talking with the employees, asking about their families. It wasn't just small talk, he genuinely cared." Barron listened intently, pieces of a man he had never met beginning to take shape. "You know," Barron said softly, "my father often talks about my grandfather, about how he treated his employees like family." 1975, a year after the first day. "Hey, Fred," Michael called out as they inspected the construction site. "Why do you do this? Helping people like me?" Fred paused, gazing into the distance. My father taught me that success isn't measured by money. It's measured by how many people you help. He turned to Michael. One day, when you have the chance, carry this tradition forward. Present day. The plane began its descent. Michael gazed out the window, silent tears streaming down his face. For 50 years, he had tried to live by Fred's words, helping other veterans, creating opportunities for those in need. And now, as Barron, Fred's grandson, whom Michael had never met, offered him his seat, the circle felt beautifully complete. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain's voice announced, we are preparing to land in Newark. Thank you for flying with us on this special flight. Present day, about 30 minutes before landing. Mr. Michael, a young journalist, spoke up. Could you tell us more about the people you've helped? Michael smiled, looking out the window as if recalling distant memories. You know, every person has a story worth telling. I remember James, an Iraq War veteran in 2005. He lost a leg just as I had been wounded. I found him in a bar, drunk and on the verge of giving up. Flashback 2005. Hey, buddy, James said, looking up from his glass. Don't preach to me. You don't get it. Michael rolled up his pant leg, revealing his prosthetic. Why don't I? James fell silent. Michael sat down beside him. Let me tell you about a man named Fred Trump. Present day. Now James runs a gym for veterans, Michael said, his smile full of pride. He helps others regain their strength, not just physically, but mentally too. A flight attendant paused nearby, listening. She quickly wiped away a tear. My dad, he's a veteran of Afghanistan. He's still struggling. Here's my number, Michael scribbled on a piece of paper. Tell him to give me a call. Flashback, 1995. Sarah, my daughter, Michael pointed to a photo on his desk. She just graduated college, top of her class. John, the foreman from years ago, now Michael's business partner, nodded proudly. From a limping veteran to this, you've come a long way, Peterson. And I'll keep helping others go even further, Michael said. It's the promise I made to Fred. Present day. Barron listened from the economy cabin, where he had moved after giving up his first-class seat. A boy, about 10 years old, sat beside him, looking at him with curious eyes. Why did you give up your seat for him? The boy asked. Barron thought for a moment. Sometimes, he said quietly, we do the right thing, not because it's easy, but because it's the right thing to do. Passengers around them began sharing their own stories. One spoke about their late father, a veteran. Another mentioned a brother serving overseas. Each story felt like an invisible thread connecting the strangers on this flight. Flashback 2015. Uncle Michael, a youthful voice, called over the phone. It's David, James's son. David, how are you? I just got accepted into the Air Force Academy, Uncle. I wanted to thank you. If you hadn't helped my dad back then. Michael's voice softened. David, your dad is the one who turned things around. I just gave him a nudge. Present day. Michael looked out the plane window, the reflection of his journey shining back at him. Life had been a series of struggles and triumphs, and every story he touched seemed to ripple forward, one life lifting another. Michael smiled, recalling that moment in the bar with James. Don't thank me, David. Thank a man named Fred Trump. And remember, when you have the chance, help others too. Present day. Can you believe it? A passenger whispered to the person next to them. A Trump giving up their first-class seat? Maybe he's not what we think, the other replied. From his seat in first class, Michael smiled. He knew Fred Trump would be smiling too, somewhere. A single act of kindness had created ripples, and those ripples continued to spread, even after 50 years. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain's voice came over the intercom. We'll be landing in 15 minutes. Yet it seemed no one on board wanted this flight to end. Stories continued to be shared, connections were being made, and the legacy of kindness quietly passed from one generation to the next. After the flight, the same day. A video capturing the moment Barron gave up his seat spread like wildfire across social media. A passenger had recorded the entire story of Michael and posted it with the caption, Kindness never dies. It simply passed from one generation to the next. Within hours, the hashtags number kindness never dies and number Barron Trump moment were trending on Twitter. Comments poured in. At veteran support. As an Iraq War veteran, I was in tears watching this. We don't need pity. We need respect and opportunities like what Fred Trump provided. Hope for heroes. This story restored my faith in humanity. Let's keep the kindness going. For every day. Hero. Barron Trump proved that no matter your last name, actions define who you are. The video's reach extended beyond the flight, touching lives across the globe and inspiring countless others to reflect on the power of a single, selfless act. Sir's social change. The moment a kind act from 50 years ago was repaid in an unimaginable way. This is what we need in today's world. 1 week after the flight, at a meeting of the American Veterans Association, Michael's story became the centerpiece. Veterans from different generations stood up to share their own experiences. I don't know Fred Trump, a young veteran said, but through Michael's story, I've learned that sometimes a small opportunity can change a person's entire life. Michael, now a symbol of resilience and kindness, was invited to speak at numerous events. He recounted Fred's impact, his struggles, and how he continued the tradition of helping others. 2 weeks after the flight, a new movement emerged in the business community, the Second Chance program, designed to create job opportunities for veterans. Inspired by the story of Fred Trump and Michael, many companies pledged to hire and train veterans. This isn't charity, one CEO declared, echoing Fred Trump's words. It's an investment in the people who sacrificed for our country. 1 month later, Barron received a letter from a high school in Kansas. The students had launched a Pay It Forward campaign where each student committed to performing one act of kindness every day. You've shown us, one student wrote, that fame or status doesn't matter as much as how we treat others. 3 months later, Michael hosted a special reunion, bringing together the veterans he had helped over the past 50 years. James, the veteran Michael met in the bar in 2005, now ran a national network of gyms for veterans. David, James's son and a cadet at the Air Force Academy, stood to speak. Fred Trump's legacy isn't just in buildings or projects. His true legacy is the chain of kind acts passed from one person to another. The room filled with applause, a testament to the enduring power of kindness. As Michael looked around at the faces of those he had touched, he felt the ripple effect of one man's compassion continuing to grow, connecting generations and inspiring hope for the future. 6 months later, a short documentary titled The Ripple Effect was released, chronicling the story of the plane encounter and tracing the lives of those inspired to carry out acts of kindness in its wake. Every act of kindness, Michael said in the film, is like a pebble dropped into a pond. We never know how far the ripples will travel or whose lives they'll touch. Present day, 1 year after the flight. At an anniversary event hosted by the Veterans Foundation, Barron and Michael met again. They embraced tightly, no words needed. In the auditorium, hundreds of veterans and their families, people touched by this story, rose to their feet, applauding. Your grandfather would be so proud of you, Michael whispered. Barron smiled, wiping away tears. I think he'd be proud of all of us, for how we're continuing his legacy. On stage, a video montage played, highlighting the ripple effect over the past year. Veterans finding jobs, families reunited, communities strengthened, and countless acts of kindness performed by strangers. Sometimes in the most ordinary moments, life reveals its extraordinary potential. A short flight from Washington to Newark had become a bridge between past and present, between pain and hope, between strangers who found common ground. The story of Michael and Barron wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was a story of how one act of kindness could echo through time, how goodness could be passed from generation to generation, and how unexpected connections could transform lives. Every day, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion, I still think of Fred Trump. Not because he was wealthy or famous, but because he showed me that a single act of kindness can change someone's life. Sir Barron stood beside him, his eyes glistening with tears. Today, we're not just celebrating a story, We're celebrating the power of kindness and renewing our commitment to spreading it further. The audience erupted into applause, a tribute to the unbreakable bonds formed through compassion and a reminder that even the smallest actions can create waves of extraordinary impact. In today's world, where negative news seems to dominate every headline, this story reminds us that kindness still exists and it has the power to change the world, one small act at a time. Dear friends, if this story has touched your heart, let it continue to ripple outward. Each of us can be part of this ripple effect. Share this story with the people you care about. Maybe they need a dose of motivation, a ray of hope, or simply a reminder that kindness is alive and well. Leave a comment to share. Which moment in the story touched your heart the most? Have you ever experienced or witnessed an unexpected act of kindness? What are your thoughts on the power of small actions? If this story brought you positivity and inspiration, don't forget to support more uplifting content. Subscribe to our channel for more meaningful stories. Click the notification bell to stay updated with our latest videos. And if you have your own story to share, feel free to leave a comment. Remember, each share of this video could be the inspiration someone needs. Help us spread the goodness, because sometimes one small act of kindness can light up someone's entire world.